Imagine for a moment New York in 1890. In a laboratory at 35 South Fifth Avenue, surrounded by giant copper coils and a constant buzzing that makes the hair on your arms stand on end, there are two men who couldn't be more different. One is tall, extremely thin, and dresses with an almost obsessive elegance. And he has a gaze that seems to be seeing the future in real time. So I'm talking about Nikola Tesla. The other is a man with an unruly white mane, a thick mustache, and he always has a cigar in his mouth. He is Samuel Clemens, although everyone knew him as Mark Twain. And the question is, how did these two geniuses meet? Well, in the most human way possible, through pure mutual admiration. Twain, the most famous writer in America, was fascinated by technology, and Tesla, the inventor who was taming lightning, was a devoted reader of Twain's books. They became inseparable. Tesla even went so far as to say that Twain's books were the only thing that helped him recover from a deadly illness a few years earlier. But you see, during those late-night meetings in the New York laboratory, Twain didn't just go to chat with Tesla, he also went seeking relief. He suffered from what he himself called the Blue Devils, meaning terrible digestion, chronic constipation, and a lack of energy that left him sunk in apathy. One day, Tesla looked at him with that half-engineer smile and said, "Sam, get up there." And there was a metal platform, a mechanical and electrical oscillator that Tesla used for his experiments. Once Mark Twain was finally up there on the platform, Tesla flipped a heavy switch, and suddenly, Twain found himself completely enveloped in a strange bath, not of warm water, but of extremely high-frequency electrical currents. He did not experience any physical pain, nor did he feel any painful muscle cramps. What he felt instead was a strange and vital tingling sensation, a deep and spreading warmth. He noticed that it was coming from within his own bones. And the story goes that Twain was so delighted with the sensation of vigor he was experiencing that he simply refused to get down, even though Tesla kept warning him and saying, "Sam, get down," because it's not good to stay on the machine for so long. But Twain didn't listen to him. And so it went, until suddenly the electricity did its cleansing work. And the writer, quite suddenly, as I mentioned before, had to jump off and run quickly to the laboratory bathroom with a desperate sense of urgency he hadn't felt in many years. Tesla, obviously, like me, was laughing, but not because it might have seemed like a practical joke. Tesla was laughing because he had just demonstrated something that modern medicine is only now beginning to rediscover. In other words, he believed that his dear friend's physical body didn't require any harsh chemicals or medical purges. What Mark Twain truly needed instead was for someone to carefully retune his complex biological oscillators. And what do I mean when I talk about a biological oscillator? You see, just imagine the string of a guitar. If you pluck it, the string doesn't stay still. In fact, it vibrates back and forth at a constant speed, and what it does is create a musical note. That is a system oscillating. If the string vibrates at its own rhythm, the music is pure. And if something slows it down or touches it out of time, the sound fades away. Or the detuning becomes noisy? Well, it turns out you're full of invisible strings. Your heart is an oscillator that sets the pulse. Your lungs have their own rhythm. In fact, even the very neurons inside your brain generate and transmit electrical impulses by following a remarkably precise and rhythmic cadence. At the deepest level, each cell is like a tiny engine that vibrates and has its own note. When Tesla put Twain on that platform, what he basically did was tune all those strings in Twain that were out of tune so that his orchestra could play in sync again. He wasn't healing a single organ. What he was doing was getting the whole orchestra to play in the same rhythm again. Tesla understood perfectly well that what he had just accomplished wasn't some kind of magic. He had simply and effectively recharged his dear friend's electronic hardware by utilizing the exact right frequency required for the task. And this is where you come in, because if Tesla was able to energize Twain more than 100 years ago, what you're going to discover today is how that same engineering can explain why you feel tired, apathetic or sick, and how your body, just like Mark Twain's, is actually an electrical capacitor waiting to be recharged. You might be wondering what exactly happened in Twain's body. For a man sunk in apathy and pain to leave that laboratory with the energy of a teenager, was it a miracle? No, it wasn't a miracle. For Tesla, miracles were simply laws of physics that had not yet been explained. And what I want you to understand today, which is going to change you, the way you look at yourself in the mirror, is that Tesla was not treating his friend's symptoms. In reality, he was doing something much more profound and deeper. He was carefully and meticulously repairing his internal power source. And now, just for a moment before we go any further, imagine that we slowly open the heavy door to that mysterious laboratory and very carefully begin to enter deep into Sam's body. Let's take a closer look to see exactly which intricate internal parts of the engine were moving, and precisely which individual gears were rotating and interlocking while he felt that vital tingling sensation. Now let's go all the way down to the incredibly detailed microforensic level of analysis. And here, forget for a moment everything you were taught in school about cells, as if they were just bags of jelly with a nucleus in the center. That's a very poor description for such advanced technology as the one you already possess today at your disposal. And I want you to see each cell for what it truly is in engineering terms: a high-precision electrical capacitor. You see, think of a capacitor. It's basically two conductive plates separated by an insulator in the middle. And in your body, those plates are the inside and the outside of the cell. And the insulator is the cell membrane, that layer of fat so thin and so perfect that it actually acts as a dielectric between the two plates. And its function is not just to separate, it also accumulates charge because it's a tiny battery, but with astonishing power. And now, pay attention to this fact, because this is where it's decided whether you'll be healthy or sick. A healthy, vibrant young cell has a potential difference, in other words, a voltage, of about minus 70 millivolts. But you might say that's not much. Well, if we scale that voltage to the thickness of that almost invisible membrane, we're talking about an electric field of millions of volts per meter. In other words, we're talking about an enormous tension. And that's the electrified fence that's actually protecting your hardware. And a little detail for the more curious among you. Sometimes you'll hear about that the pH of your body is also a kind of voltage, and that's true, but you shouldn't confuse them, because pH is the voltage of your environment, of the liquid in which your cells float. It's kind of like the water pressure in the pipes throughout the whole city. But these minus 70 millivolts I'm talking about are the specific voltage of the battery of your own cell. And there you need the outside pressure to be correct. That is, you need to have an alkaline pH so that your cell can have the necessary strength to charge its own battery, up to those minus 70 millivolts. And if the environment fails, your battery discharges. It's that simple when you are healthy. Your trillions of capacitors are fully charged, and in that state of minus 70 millivolts, your cell is literally invulnerable. No virus, no bacteria, and no toxin can connect to your system, because the electrical pressure is so high that purely by physics, it repels them. It's like trying to bring two magnets together by the same pole. It's impossible. There is an invisible but impenetrable force that prevents contact between the two. And what happens when you get stressed, when you get dehydrated with water that lacks information, or when you surround yourself with hostile electromagnetic fields? Well, that voltage starts to drop. You go down to minus 50 millivolts to minus 40 millivolts, and that's where the engineering fails. The membrane becomes weak, porous to interference, the electric field collapses, and suddenly the invader now has something to hold on to. Disease, from my point of view, and especially from Tesla's point of view, is not an external attack. It is a loss of electrical pressure, a true local blackout. And Tesla knew that the high-frequency currents he applied to Twain had the property of charging those biological capacitors without burning them. Just like wireless charging now recharges your phone, those coils were restoring Twain's cells to their original voltage. He was turning up the switch on his vital energy. That's why, when Twain stepped off the platform, it wasn't just that he felt good, it was that his hardware was simply retuned. His mitochondrial engines started spinning at the right speed again because the capacitor now had the necessary voltage to function. And now you'll see, if you stay with me, in a few minutes I'm going to explain how you, without needing a 3-meter coil in your living room, can also start to protect that biofield and begin to reclaim your electrical sovereignty. Because you see, a charged body is a body that does not know the fear of illness. And now I'd like us to take one more step on this design board, because if you've understood that you are a capacitor that accumulates charge, now you also need to understand how that charge communicates. And this is where Tesla sets himself apart from all the scientists of his time. While others became obsessed with wires, Tesla became obsessed with resonance. Imagine that you are pushing a child on a swing. The swing has its own natural rhythm, its own sway, and if you try to push it at any random moment, you'll most likely bump into it, slow it down, or even hurt the child because you're using force, but there's no resonance. But if you wait for the right moment, that exact second when the swing stops going up and starts coming down, and there you give it a gentle push and the swing goes up afterward. Much higher and much better. And the truth is, you've barely made any effort, but you've achieved the maximum movement. That is resonance. That is when the force you apply from outside matches exactly with the natural rhythm of what's inside. Tesla became obsessed with this because he understood, thank you, that the human body doesn't need to be pushed with brute force, which is basically what chemical medicines do when they come in breaking down doors. What the body needs is for someone to find its rhythm, that is its frequency, and give it that little push at the precise moment it needs it most. Another example, which might help you understand it, is the one about the opera singer and the crystal glass. The great Italian tenor Enrico Caruso, at gatherings with friends, would tap the glass so he could hear its natural note, that is, its resonant frequency. And once his privileged ear picked up that note, he would bring the glass close to his face. And he would sing that same note with tremendous power. When the vibration of his voice matched that of the glass would tremble, and shortly after it would shatter. Why? Because the singer found the exact note that made the atoms in the glass vibrate. And when the two vibrations matched, the energy multiplied so much that the glass simply couldn't withstand it. For Tesla, healing was exactly that, finding the note of your cells and making it resonate from the outside. When the cell hears its own note, it starts to vibrate strongly, regains its energy, and recharges itself. And this isn't magic, it's simply about finding the rhythm of music of life. You're probably asking yourself a question that is, without a doubt, logical. You might say, Jose Maria, if Tesla was running currents of thousands of volts through Mark Twain, why didn't it kill him? Why didn't he get stuck to the machine or end up completely fried? And the answer is pure high-frequency engineering. Nikola Tesla discovered that the human body has an absolutely fascinating property. At low frequencies, like the 50 Hz or 60 Hz we have in household outlets, electricity is dangerous because it interferes with the rhythm of the heart and with the nerves. But when you raise the frequency to thousands or even millions of cycles per second, something truly magical happens. The Joule effect disappears, resistance decreases, and capacitive coupling comes into play. And now you'll see, we're going to get into the details. About frequency, think about this. The 50 or 60 Hz in your home means that electricity changes direction 50 or 60 times per second. It's a slow pace, basically like the rhythm of the sea, like hitting a nail at a steady rate. But when Tesla talked about thousands or millions, we're talking about a massive leap in scale. 1,000,000 cycles per second, that is 1 megahertz, is 20,000 times faster than the outlet in your wall. It's like going from watching a turtle walk to seeing the wings of a hummingbird flapping so fast you can't even see them. Well, it turns out that at that speed, electricity stops behaving like a current flowing through a wire, and it starts to behave like a radio wave traveling through the air. And as for the Joule effect I mentioned, it's something you experience every day. It's basically a physical law. It states that when electricity passes through a material that offers resistance, like a wire or even your own body, part of that energy is converted into heat. And this is basically what makes a light bulb glow or a toaster toast your bread in the morning when you have breakfast. With the regular electricity at home, if too much of it passed through you, the Joule effect would burn you from the inside because your tissues offer resistance. That's the heat we're talking about. What Tesla discovered, and this is the magical part, is that at extremely high frequencies, electricity no longer pushes against the resistance of your organs. It simply slides along the surface or passes through without generating any friction. To help you picture this, it's as if a car were going so fast that it no longer touched the asphalt and avoided it altogether. That way, the tires wouldn't heat up from the friction. And finally, there's capacitive coupling. This is the most fascinating concept in this video. Imagine you had two metal plates separated by a piece of glass. If you try to pass normal electricity through, the glass stops it, because glass is an insulator. But if you use Tesla's high frequency, the energy jumps from one plate to another without the need for wires and using the glass as if it were an invisible bridge. Since we've already established that your cell is a capacitor, that is, two conductive plates with an insulator in between, capacitive coupling is basically the technology that allows the energy from the Tesla coil to enter directly into your cell without having to break through. The membrane is literally wireless charging for your cells. Tesla didn't need to poke Twain with electric needles. All he had to do was bring him close to the right frequency, and his cells would absorb the energy through the electric field, just like your phone charges today on a wireless charging pad. He eventually realized that we are, quite literally, highly sensitive tunable antennas. Think of an old radio device. To listen to your favorite station, you have to turn the dial until the frequency of the device matches exactly with the frequency of the radio station. And that is resonance. When they match, the energy flows and the music sounds crystal clear. But if you move the dial even a millimeter, all you hear is noise, static, and distortion. Well, Tesla claimed that health is the state in which your biological hardware is perfectly tuned to the frequency of life. And what about illness? For him, it wasn't an evil entity, but rather a loss of tuning. When your cell loses its charge and drops below those minus 70 millivolts I mentioned, its resonance frequency changes. It simply changes, becomes noisy, stops receiving the correct information from its environment, and starts vibrating in a chaotic way. Tesla used his coils to generate a cleansing field, and by subjecting the body to a powerful harmonic frequency, he forced the cells to return to their original vibration. It's like striking an out-of-tune tuning fork with one that sounds perfect. It turns out that, purely by sympathy, the out-of-tune one ends up vibrating at the correct speed. But pause with me for a second. Breathe. I know that what I'm telling you might seem to you like aerospace engineering, but deep down, it's much simpler than you think. If your radio sounds bad, you don't throw the whole thing in the trash. You simply look for the right station. And what we're doing here is basically learning how to tune in. Thank you. Your own dial. So don't worry if you don't catch every detail. Technical right now. What's important here is that you understand that you are in control of your own frequency. A vital biophysical concept comes into play in all of this, which is the dielectric constant of your tissues. Tesla understood that our fluids and our fats determine how well or how poorly our antenna resonates. If your tissues are intoxicated or dehydrated, your dielectric constant changes, your antenna becomes inefficient, and you start picking up interference. And this is where two dogmas collide. Traditional chemical medicine tells you to swallow this specific pharmaceutical pill to eliminate that harmful foreign invader. And Nikola Tesla would instead advise you to raise your frequency, charge your internal capacitor, and carefully tune your antenna. If your vibration is correct, the invader won't even be able to approach your working frequency. That's what Tesla would tell you. Because Tesla was convinced that if we bathe the body in the right frequencies, not only would we eliminate pathogens through pure resonance, that is, making them explode like a crystal glass when a tenor hits the perfect note, but we would also be raising human potential to levels that even today might seem like science fiction to us. And if you think this is just a theory from the last century, get ready. Because in a moment, what I'm going to do is show you how you can apply this resonance programming today to protect your biofield in a world that is literally trying to throw you out of tune every second. At this point, you have to ask yourself the question that separates survivors from victims in this 21st century. If we are antennas and we are capacitors, which we are, why is it so hard for us today to stay in tune? And the answer is very simple. We live in what I can call, and you will understand as well, a soup of interferences. And Tesla lived in a world where electromagnetic silence was almost absolute. However, today, you are submerged in a constant bombardment of artificial frequencies. Wi-Fi on one hand, mobile phones, satellites. For your biological hardware, this is like trying to hear a whisper in the middle of a heavy metal concert. It's pure noise. And this is where true biophysical programming comes in to protect your biofield. Tesla discovered that for an antenna to avoid picking up interference, it simply needs to be selective. Notice how simple that is. And your selectivity depends on a property of your tissues that mainstream medicine usually ignores, piezoelectricity. Try to visualize your body not as flesh and bone, but as a true liquid crystal semiconductor. Your collagen, your fascia, which is that network that wraps around each of your organs, is a crystalline structure. We've already seen this in other videos, but here comes the secret. Do you happen to know those sneakers that kids wear, the ones that light up every time they take a step? I'm sure you do. You see, those sneakers have a small sensor so that when the child presses the sole against the ground, it turns that impact into a flash of light. Well, it turns out that you are like that sneaker. Your collagen and your bones are crystals that, when subjected to the pressure of movement, automatically generate electricity. If you move, if you walk, if you stretch, there is light in your cells. But if you sit on the couch and stay still for hours, the lights in your biological system will start to flicker until they go out. That is piezoelectricity, meaning movement that turns into your own vital spark to keep the cellular capacitor charged. And Tesla knew that if the hardware is solid and the internal vibration is powerful, the external noise cannot penetrate. In engineering, this is what we call a high signal-to-noise ratio. If your signal is strong, your neighbor's Wi-Fi is irrelevant to your health. But if your signal is weak because you are dehydrated, because you don't move, or because your fluids are stagnant, then any external frequency can take control of your biological remote control. And how can we program our resonance to be invulnerable in this truly hostile environment we live in? The key is not to run away from the modern world, but to shield your own oscillator. And here I propose 3 engineering actions that I'm sure Tesla would have immediately approved. The first is to properly maintain your dielectric. That is, your cell membrane needs high-quality fats and conductive minerals. If you try to make a capacitor with cheap materials, the charge will escape. The virgin sea salt from marine salt flats that I regularly recommend to you is not a seasoning for food. It is the electrolyte that allows your antenna to resonate. Second, pay attention to natural wireless charging. Tesla used to bathe in his coils, but you have a natural coil 150 million kilometers away, the sun. Infrared light is the frequency that charges the water in your cells, turning it into an exclusion battery that effortlessly maintains minus 70 millivolts. Get out in the sun. Third, tuning in with the earth. Grounding or earthing is not some esoteric trend that I'm suggesting to you. Basically, it's about discharging the excess static from your capacitor and tuning yourself to the Schumann frequency, which is the heartbeat of the earth and acts as a true master clock for your system. And here you'll see as I talk to you. This time, when talking about grounding, as I've done so many times before, it's the first time I've mentioned the Schumann frequency to you. And this is because it may be one of the most beautiful pieces of planetary engineering, and I wanted to save it for this video about Nikola Tesla. You see, think of the Earth as if it were a giant, hollow bell. On one hand, you have the ground we walk on, which is conductive, and about 100 kilometers above our heads, there's a layer of the atmosphere called the ionosphere, which is also conductive. And you'll see the space in between is what, in engineering, we simply call a resonance cavity. That is, it's the place. This is exactly where the magic happens. And now, the big question we must ask is this: who is it that actually strikes that metaphorical bell? Well, as you are about to see, the answer is surprisingly simple. It is lightning. Every single second that passes, approximately 50 powerful lightning bolts strike in many different parts of the world. And each and every one of those giant electrical sparks generates a massive electromagnetic wave. These waves immediately start circling the entire planet, bouncing back and forth between the solid ground below and the high roof of the ionosphere above. And since the space is always the same, these waves end up creating a constant musical note, a kind of very low frequency hum that surrounds the entire globe, and it turns out that this note is 7.83 Hertz. And this is precisely the point where things start to get truly fascinating for all of us involved. What a surprise! The brain waves of a human being in a state of calm and creativity. That is, alpha waves, vibrate at exactly that same frequency of 7.83 Hertz. And this is not a coincidence, because, as you well know, we have evolved for millions of years inside that bell I asked you to imagine. And what our brain does is use it as a reference signal. It is the master clock that tells your cells, hey, we are on Earth. This is the rhythm at which you have to work. And the incredible thing about this story is that Nikola Tesla had already detected this global pulse in his Colorado Springs laboratory long before the physicist Winfried Schumann officially described it in the 1950s. Tesla knew that if we wanted to transmit energy or health wirelessly, we had to use the Earth's own node so that the system would not have losses. And not only did he detect it, but also he tried to use it to heal the world. He knew that we didn't need wiring and that it was enough for us to tune in to the wiring that the Earth already gives us every day. And when I tell you that Wi-Fi or cell phone antennas throw us out of tune, it's because those devices blast frequencies of billions of hertz and drown out the gentle whisper of the Earth's 7.83 hertz. It's like trying to hear your mother's heartbeat in the middle of a construction site with jackhammers. Grounding, that is, touching the Earth, is simply reconnecting your personal antenna with that original heartbeat so your system can know what time it is again. And Tesla claimed that if we managed to keep the biofield in order, the human body would be capable of regenerating tissues that we currently consider lost. He said that illness is simply electrical amnesia. And think about it, if your body has forgotten how to vibrate, what it needs is not a chemical punishment, but a simple reunion or reminder. It needs someone to whisper the correct frequency in its ear so it can wake up. And this is where the story gets strange. Because you see, there was a time when we all knew this. There was a time when remembering that electric music was something normal in many homes. And yet we were forced to forget. We were forcibly disconnected. And next, I'm going to get into the darkest, and at the same time, the brightest part of this story. The high-frequency therapies that were erased from the map, and how Tesla proved that electricity is, in fact, the original fuel of life. Get ready to understand why healing is simply plugging the hardware back in. This is where we enter the territory of uncomfortable truths, those that have remained hidden under layers of commercial interests for more than a century. Because if Tesla's technology was so effective, how is it possible that today there isn't a coil in every hospital? Ask yourself that. And to understand this collision of dogmas, we have to travel for a moment to the beginning of the 20th century. Back then, medicine was at a crossroads. We could either follow Tesla's path and biophysics, understanding the body as an electrical structure, or follow the path of the emerging chemical industry that sought to patent molecules. You already know who won. The dogma that prevailed was that the body is a kind of chemical test tube. But before that happened, there was a technology that served as a direct bridge between Tesla's ideas and your everyday health. And here I'm talking to you about high-frequency therapies. And especially, I'm talking about an object that today seems like science fiction, but that your great-grandmother probably knew very well. She probably knew the violet ray very well. And what exactly was this violet ray? Well, imagine a small leather case that, when opened, revealed a bakelite handle and several glass tubes in whimsical shapes. When you plugged it in and brought the glass close to your skin, the tube would light up with a magical, vibrant violet glow. And it wasn't a light bulb, it was a noble gas excited by Tesla's high frequency. And when you touched yourself with it, you would feel a warm tingling and a very particular smell like wet earth after a typical summer storm. And that smell was the ozone being generated by the electric discharge. Back in those days, people used it for almost everything imaginable. They applied it for chronic back pain, used it to heal various skin conditions, or simply relied on it to relieve their deep fatigue after finally coming home from a long day of work. And they didn't feel like patients. They felt like engineers of their own energy. It was like having a small piece of Tesla's laboratory on their nightstand, recharging their cellular capacitors before going to sleep. But what happened to these devices? Why are they no longer on your nightstand? And it wasn't because they stopped working. It was simply because they didn't fit into the new business model that was being created at the time. A device you buy only once and that lasts for a lifetime, running on the very same energy that makes the planet spin, simply doesn't allow for a monthly subscription or a state of constant dependency. This kind of technology was fundamentally incompatible with the profit-driven goals of the modern corporate landscape. The commercial balance tipped in favor of the chemical molecule that gets used up and needs to be replenished every day. And so, what was once a common tool for home health, over time, it was labeled as quackery and pushed out of homes until eventually new regulations banned it. Tesla demonstrated something that, as I was saying, sounds like science fiction to us today. That electricity is not an external danger, but the original fuel of life. And you'll see. Conventional medicine sees disease as an enemy that must be poisoned with chemicals. But Tesla, as I was saying, simply saw it as a loss of charge. Healing is not fighting. Healing is plugging the hardware back into the source of electrons. Think of it this way. If your phone runs out of battery, you don't try to fix the processor with chemicals, do you? Right? Or maybe not. You simply plug it into the power source, and your cells work exactly the same way. When I talk to you about the critical importance of maintaining those specific -70 millivolts, I am really talking about the absolute minimum electrical pressure that is fundamentally necessary for human life to occur. Tesla claimed that bathing the body in high-frequency currents would globally raise the membrane potential. In other words, you weren't treating the liver or the lung, you were charging the basic infrastructure of the entire organism. And this is where we discover the true secret of Tesla's engineering, what I call the purge. By resonance? You see, do you remember what I told you earlier about Caruso, the opera singer, and the crystal glass? I told you that the glass doesn't break because of the force of the shout or the singing, but because the singer finds the exact note that makes the crystal vibrate. Well then, now apply that to what happens inside you. Every virus, every pathogenic bacteria, every parasite that tries to invade you has its own musical note, its own vibration frequency. And it turns out that those notes are usually very low, erratic, and above all, very fragile. They're like little low-quality crystal glasses. Thank you. That vibrate in a chaotic way. In contrast, your healthy cells are like large bronze bells, heavy and robust. And when Tesla bathes you in those high-frequency currents, what it's basically doing is emitting a note so pure and so powerful that something fascinating happens. Your cells, those bronze bells, effortlessly and naturally absorb the energy and begin to resonate and vibrate with pure joy, effectively recharging their internal cellular batteries, all the way up to a full charge of -70 millivolts. But for the invaders, that same note is an earthquake. Unable to tune into such high energy, Their structures begin to shake violently until they literally explode like a crystal glass, disintegrating due to pure physics. And this is exactly like walking into a large room full of thick dust and turning on a powerful speaker with such a perfect resonant vibration that the dust simply can't stick to the furniture anymore, and eventually gets blown right out through the open windows. Tesla wasn't looking for a poison to kill bacteria. He simply turned up the volume of life. He knew that if your body vibrates with enough intensity, disease can't find a place to settle in those cases. It's an absolute cleansing that doesn't use chemicals, but rather the simple sound of electricity. And that's why, after a session with his coils, people not only felt cured, they felt clean inside, as if an electric duster had swept through every corner of their hardware. Biophysics tells us that capacitive coupling allows energy to penetrate deeply into tissues without causing thermal damage. It is a deep recharge that affects the dielectric constant of your fluids. And Tesla said that this bath of electrons not only eliminated disease, but also swept away fatigue and mental stagnation. And the tragedy is that we were taught to fear electricity while making us dependent on chemicals. They told us we are beings of carbon, when in reality we are beings of light and voltage. But you see, biological sovereignty is precisely about this, about reclaiming the plane. The original design of the engineer and understanding that if you keep your capacitor charged and your frequency tuned, the hardware repairs itself, because nature does not make design mistakes. It only suffers from a lack of electrical maintenance. And this is where I want you to pause for a second. If you feel tired, if you feel like your body no longer responds as it used to, it's not because your hardware is old or broken. It's simply that you've been convinced you are just a set of chemical parts that needs constant patching, when in reality, what you need is to recover your voltage. Nikola Tesla knew this fundamental truth. He deeply understood that biological sovereignty is not merely a privilege for a select few individuals, but it is an inherent birthright that has been systematically hidden from us, under massive mountains of complex medical labels and confusing terminology. And that is the reason why, despite having discovered everything, Tesla ended his days in a way that many consider sad, but which for us today takes on a completely new. He spent his final remaining days living quietly in a small room at the iconic New Yorker hotel, surrounded by his beloved pigeons and complex scientific blueprints that the rest of the world was simply not yet ready to fully understand. Many people called him completely crazy, but I personally think he was simply far too alone, existing on a unique frequency that others couldn't even begin to reach. Tune in. He knew that the future of medicine would not be in the pharmacy, but in the study of waves. And he said that the day science began to study non-physical phenomena, it would progress more in a decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence. Those sessions with Mark Twain were not just therapy sessions, they were demonstrations of a fundamental truth that today I am going to give you, or am giving to you. Your body is a self-proclaiming organism and you are responsible for maintaining its charge. Twain lived to the age of 74, a remarkable age for his time, and he always remembered those discharges from Tesla as the elixir that brought him back to life. But it wasn't a magical elixir, it was pure physics applied to biology. And today, in the 21st century, we find ourselves at a crossroads similar to that time. We have all the technology in the world, yet we are more out of sync than ever before. That's why I wanted to bring you this story. And not so that you go looking for it or search for an old Tesla coil, which do exist, you can find them, but so that you understand that sovereignty over your health begins with recovering your voltage. You are a high-frequency capacitor. And every time you seek sunlight, every time you touch the earth with your bare feet, every time you hydrate your cells with water charged with conductive minerals, you are doing exactly the same thing Tesla did with Twain. You are flipping the switch of your own power plant. You are strengthening that minus 70 millivolt field that keeps you safe from the noise and chaos of your surroundings. Don't let anyone convince you that you are a defective system or that you constantly need chemical patches. Your hardware is perfect, and your design is a masterpiece of natural engineering. The hand of God and the great Creator is behind it. You only need to maintain the proper electrical pressure so that the program of life runs without errors in your body. And as Tesla used to say, free energy is all around us. We just have to learn how to connect with it. As for me, I'll be here. On this channel, we are dedicated to rescuing these long-forgotten chronicles and carefully translating the complex world of biophysics so that you can finally become the true and sovereign architect of your own vitality. Because when you truly understand that you are made of electricity, you will finally stop being so afraid of the dark. If you liked the video and think it could be useful for others, you would be doing me a huge favor by sharing it, because you'll help me spread knowledge that I truly believe is necessary. As I always tell you, keep moving forward, always forward, and I'll read your comments.